Okay, last question. So Harry Potter shows up, and then he's like, "Okay, I can wave my magic wand, and then make anything happen as long as you make the you say so." And then, what would that magic wand to fix in BC Forestry right now? Only one thing, the top thing right now that can make BC Forestry that much better. Welcome to the UNBC Forestry Club Podcast. This podcast is recorded at the C4 radio station on campus from the traditional unceded territory of Lheidli. You're probably listening from other places in BC or Canada or maybe around the world. We encourage you to recognize the traditional territory you get to learn, play, and live on. All right, welcome back to the podcast. This is a very special episode because sitting across me today is my professor for my Forestry 408 class, which is the Forest Practices and Management course, but we like to call it the Forestry Policy class. He's a registered professional forester, but he also went to a law school and practiced law for a couple of years. He has a stunning resume working in both private and public sectors, including VP for Dunkley, VP for Pinnacle, Associate Deputy Minister, and Executive Director of the Forest Enhancement Society of BC. He makes me want to fail his class so I can come back and talk to him again next year. But this is unnecessary because he's here today with us, and this man is nobody else but the one and only Jason Fisher. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
That is the best introduction I've ever had. Can you come and do that for me more often?
Of course. Absolutely. Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, no, we just had our last class last night with the presentations, and I got to hear a lot of passionate young foresters talk about how they would fix things, and that gets me excited. Yeah,
so I just want to really thank you for coming in. I know you're really, really busy. You work in a full-time job, teaching all the forestry students on campus, raising kids, having a family. I know it's a hard thing to do. I just really want to appreciate you spending the time and come and talk to me and then share your visions and with more people.
Well, I think we have to have more conversations about forestry, so I'm glad to get to have one that we get to share with other interested people.
Yeah, I think this is the best time to do it because during the semester is like a go time. Like You're so busy. At least I was so busy. And you don't have the time to really calm down. And this is the time you kind of calm down a bit and then kind of think about, kind of digest what you have to learn during the semester. And it's always fascinating to think about like the contrast between the before I took the class and after, like what I've learned. So this is the time.
Stop sucking up to me now, okay?
Well, you're marking my stuff, so just trying to get some bonus mark right here.
Yeah.
But I really just want to give the audience some introduction for the Forestry 408, the Forest Policy. It's a class that basically talk about how the BC Forest, the government functions and the ownership of the forest to the tenure system, to the timber pricing system, to some of the legislations and regulation is important for the drive to the current forest management to nowadays. And I think I said this a couple of times, but this is one of my favorite class.
Oh, good.
In this whole program, I think is important for forestry students to know, to learn all these stuff. And we briefly talked about this, but Lacey Rose is coming to join us next year. And then she wants to learn more about BC forestry. And then without taking this class, I won't be confident to even get on the podcast and just briefly introduce what we actually do in BC to foresters in other provinces. So I'm just really glad that's you who's teaching this class, and I learned a lot during this semester. And all those guest speakers, maybe from the conservation side of things to the deputy
chief foresters,
and it's just such a priceless course.
Well, that's great. I mean, my hope in teaching the course, and it's still a work in progress, like I hope to teach it better next year, is really to help students understand that, it's a complex system, that there's all these different drivers, there's all these different perspectives, and they all have an impact on, the rules that we operate in as foresters and as biologists and as ecologists and everyone who play a role in trying to manage forests for the multiple things that we try and manage forests for. And I also want people to feel like they have the power to make changes. I think the really heart of that power of making changes is really being clear about what it is that you're trying to change, really understanding what are the drivers that are going to, support the thing that you're trying to change, or block the change that you're trying to make, and then being able to articulate why it is that you want to make the change, what the trade-offs are going to be. Because anytime you're talking about policy, you're really just talking about how do you make trade-offs between competing priorities. That's what we're trying to do.
The biggest takeaway from this class, I don't know if you agree with, but it's my biggest takeaway anyway, is BC Forestry is really complex. BC Forest is really diverse, and then and typically we kind of make the policy, you call it the blanket policy, that covers all forests in British Columbia. I think the scale of the policy is important, and then what kind of impact you want to, what kind of goal you want to achieve at what scale is super important. That's the biggest takeaway, is when you're trying to make a policy, or even talking about forestry. I'm guilty for this. I tend to talk BC Forestry, but the coastal forestry is so important than the interior.
Yep.
Even the Prince George forestry is different than Mackenzie, than Fort St. James, than other places. A very unique. Each district is even unique, and some argument even at the district level is too broad. You want to bring it down to, we talk about this in the class, maybe down to a woodland or even small scales. So you have very specific policy kind of objectives for the forest, for the communities.
I think you do have to set some broader objectives or some broader standards. I think that's really important. But I do think that it's really hard to manage forests aspatially. So, we have a habit, I think, in the province of talking about BC's forests, like you're saying. We talk about the AAC for the province, and really, it's set at the timber supply area level, but that's still a huge area of land, and it ends up being a number that doesn't directly translate into how is this particular forest managed. And I think if you're a forester, or if you're an ecologist, or if you're a biologist, or if you're just a person who likes being in the forest, we don't think of forests aspatially. We think about this particular forest that's near my house, or this particular forest where I went and got my Christmas tree when I was a kid, or this particular forest that has the biggest spruce, or it's very place based. And the activities that we do are very place based. We have an impact on the land with everything that we're doing, and so thinking about forests spatially, understanding that the context in different communities for how they feel about forests and about forestry is so different. Understanding the expectations around the economy in different communities related to forestry is so different from place to place. Really, I think it behooves us to figure out how do we get as bespoke as we can in relation to forest management and forest policy, and support more informed, more empowered local decision making about forests.
I think I probably some people are going to disagree with this, but I think in school this program is called Forest Ecology and Management at UNBC. It's not called forestry, and is very not like industrial oriented. I think we really emphasize on the ecology, on the biology side of things, and there's a minor you can pick is the planning and the operation. Then you learn something about the economy and how important or how things are functioned in the industrial forestry kind of thing. And there's, of course, forest economy that you can take. But other than that, everything else is focusing on pretty much scientific side. I 100% get it. But I think there's a disconnection between what we learn in school but what we actually do in the workforce. As soon as you get out there and the working, you might not work in the forestry sector, and I get it. But if you work in the forestry sector, then the economy and money is a big thing to whether we like it or not. That's the drive to society. I put myself in debt to come back to school. I still have to pay off my student loan somehow, and then I want to go out for a hiking trip with my friends, and you have to spend Canadian dollar to buy the tickets, and so I think money is important to talk in forestry sector and in the forestry, at least in the courses in school. And I think you did a really good job balancing that and talk about the kind of economic side of things. And just appreciate that.
Well, thanks. And I think it's fair to say that there are pendulums that swing, and the role of forestry in the economy is one of those pendulums that swing, or the predominance or the importance of economy as being the primary driver of forest management is one of those things that swing. I mean, we're in a time of unprecedented climate change. The carbon that's in the air right now, we still haven't felt the full impacts of what that's going to have on a warming climate and the way it's going to change forest management. In large areas of the province, we have communities that are at serious risk from forest fires. Again, some of that's drought related, some of that is historic management related, some of that is this belief that somehow we can put forests on hold, that we can just hold them in one state and they'll stay there. And that's just not the case. I mean, I think for me, going back to like my first class in forestry school, learning about cereal stages, understanding that, in my puny lifespan, I'm still going to see a forest change significantly. But that's nothing compared to the changes that are happening in a forest over centuries. And when you're actually walking through the forest and you're seeing that it is a dynamic equilibrium, there are trees dropping out, there are endemic levels of bark beetle that are going to kill some trees and make openings, and there's going to be nurse logs and all those other things depending on the ecosystem that you're talking about. But forests aren't static. Forests are changing all the time, and they're dynamic places. They're dynamic on a time scale that isn't readily apparent if you're busy doing other things and you're not a forest nerd.
Yeah, it's not like E. coli. You do a treatment and then the result in minutes.
That's right.
The forestry treatments take years and years, and you have to make sure nothing changes throughout those years. And it's hard to come up with a one factor that do any experiments in forestry. But that's I think as a community, the forestry community, or any land management decisions, you're kind of making a decision in a lot of uncertainties. You're making a choice in the unknowns. Mm-hmm. It's kind of hard. And then there are arguments that, if you should be more on the conservation side, making decision towards conservation side in this uncertainty, or towards development. And, that leads to the discussions of whether we should manage our forests, should let them just sit there, be natural. And, these are a really hard topic, and I really want to talk about later. Okay. But right now, I just want to know more about you, Jason, as a person. Like, out of all these professions, why forestry? Like, why? How do you initially get into forestry? Are you the first generations of foresters in your family?
Kind of. I have uncles who have worked in the forest sector, right. Both inside of government and in the private sector. But my dad was an accountant and worked at the local hospital here. That was his job, and his dad ran a gas station and then worked in a sawmill at some time in his life. So, like many people in British Columbia, you don't have to go too far. There's not too many degrees of separation between anyone and a forestry job. But when I went to university, I went to UBC. I did the Arts 1 program. I was studying philosophy and anthropology, and I had this idea that I was going to go to med school, and I was maybe I wouldn't practice medicine, but I was going to be a medical anthropologist and work in forests or do something like that. And so, as I got more practical and realized that, well, maybe I should have a backup plan, and probably being a philosopher anthropologist wasn't going to be that. I started to look more on the forestry side of things because that still connected with my interest in the outdoors and my interest in plants and my interest in birds and my interest in medicine, certainly. And so that kind of led me into forestry. I didn't get into med school, so my fallback plan became law school, and I did that instead.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, so you finished your forestry school, and then you worked. Did you work in the forestry sector after that, or?
I did. I mostly worked through my degree. and in summer jobs. And then I worked for a couple of years for Dunkley in their forestry department before going to law school.
Why law school? That drives me. That I just couldn't figure it. Like, that's so cool. I don't know anybody that's RPF and also has a law degree and actually practiced law for a couple of years. Yep. Like, why law?
There's a small handful of us. I mean, I think it maybe it's so I could one day teach a policy course at UNBC. Maybe that's why it happened. But it is like, this is a really legalistic profession, particularly in British Columbia.
Yeah.
We have all these laws and all these regulations and all these practices that outline what we can and we can't do. And it was. And there's actually a small handful of us. Gary Mansell worked at Davis & Company at the time, and that's where I ended up going as a summer student in my law program. So I was working for forestry clients in my legal practice, both helping with contracts of sale and purchase of tenures or quota contracts on the coast. I did some defense work for some of my clients in relation to wildfire cases and a landslide case before the Forest Appeals Commission, and I got a chance to to put my forest understanding at least to use in a legal context, working with those clients.
Because when you talk about lawyer or attorney, because in my opinion, I'm picturing those people in the suits in front of the judge, is not guilty. And then was that similar to what you experienced? Because you said you did some defense. Was that what you did?
Some of it. I mean, the Forest Appeals Commission it's an administrative body that if there's alleged contraventions of certain acts, you have a choice, or the government has a choice to pursue them administratively. So issue a ticket and a fine,
right? Or
if it's serious enough, then they may have another route and treat it as more like a criminal offense, and then that goes through the courts. But the Forest Appeals Commission is this administrative body of foresters and lawyers and people who have a good understanding of forestry topics, who are then asked to adjudicate these cases that come before them.
We have my friend Jack from the Forestry Club. He initially started in the not law school. I forgot what the degree called, but it's the prereq for before you get into law school.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, like, we all have this idea of what law school is supposed to be like, but he getting to law school, or not law school, I forgot what the program called. Sorry, but he started just doing a whole bunch of reading,
mm-hmm.
like careful reading, careful drafting, which is something you mentioned about that helps you down the road. And I'm not good at reading. I'm not good at writing. And that's something that I really want to improve. And I'm working on it right now. And because, we probably all get into forestry because we like to be outside. And I was working as a forestry tech for a little bit, and then got promoted as a crew lead, kind of running a crew out there in the middle of nowhere in Mackenzie.
Mm-hmm.
And then got promoted, become a supervisor. And I figured that as the higher you go, the less you actually be in the field to do the work, but more of the communication side of things.
Yeah.
Both in writing and speaking. And that's when I starting to kind of realize the importance of those skills.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, through COVID and through, just the changes that we're seeing technologically in the world, like it's good in one sense that we're getting a chance to prioritize other forms of communication. Like, the ability to actually have conversations with people is a bit of a lost art these days. So good on you for dedicating yourself to that practice. But yeah, whether it's forestry or whether it's law or whether whatever it is that you're doing, communication is so much a determinant of how successful you're going to be, because there's very, very few careers where it's just you,
yeah.
and you can do all the things that you want to do, and you don't have to act through others or rally others or bring others around to your way of thinking. So yeah, I think when I think back to law school, it was really the discipline of looking for where are the inconsistencies, where are the potential problems, and what are the potential solutions, and really being disciplined about communicating so that you're clearly understood. Like, you cannot be ambiguous in law.
Yeah, and that's something I need to work on. And Yeah, but just by doing this podcast and then having not even just at the recording side, but initial engagement with the guests to convince them to come over, to make sure they're comfortable talking with us, and then kind of express our goals and really transparent with what we want to try to achieve. I think that's the biggest lesson I learned coming back to school, is how to actually efficiently and precisely communicate with other people, both in writing and speaking.
Well, your listeners should know that you did promise me snacks, and that's what got me into the studio.
Well, I never promised like when it's going to be delivered. So I think, that just, I will. Do you want donuts afterwards?
No, I'm good.
No, it's okay. I can get donuts. I was just a bunch of phone calls before this, trying to get the next batch of guests lined up. So I was literally sitting at home calling people for like an hour and a half, and then and trying to. Also, I have a midterm tomorrow, finals tomorrow. Oh, I supposed to be study, but right now I'm just like, ooh. But I think we
could do flashcards later. Maybe that would be exciting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I figured this is more important. The GPA, the grades, and they're important, but I think that this day and age, just having professionals to come and talk to us, especially I want to call myself a forester in the future, and that is just more important in my opinion. Anyway, so you practiced law for a little bit, and then, from my understanding, you went to Dunkley, right?
That's right. I ended up going. They call it in-house. So when you stop being a lawyer for hire at a firm and you go and work with one specific client, and Dunkley was the client I went to work with. Yeah.
How do you become a VP, like vice president? Like that.
It's all nepotism. No, it was interesting. I had worked at Dunkley previously as a summer student, and then as a doing layout and logging supervision and different things like that before going into law school. I met my wife there. She was working in reception at Dunkley. Her uncles own the mill, so there is that family relationship there. Right. But when I was brought back in, Dunkley was a client of mine at Davis & Company. When I came back in as a in-house counsel, Dunkley, they were just going through that process of kind of transitioning from the first generation of ownership to the second generation of ownership.
Right.
And so they, the opportunity was there to be a part of that team, that second generation that was going to start to lead the company forward.
Yeah. The opportunity to open up, and then came in. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And that, I learned so much about sawmilling. I learned so much about the economic system that lumber operates in, going to Japan and to China when we were opening up markets there, or supporting existing markets there, working to influence government on policies, to understand policies better, to work with other people in the forest sector on policy issues. Those are all things that I got to do. And I think, like so many of the stories of the people that I admired, because the other thing I got to do is I got to work with these amazing foresters, Steve Sheldon and Doug Perdue and Blair Mays, and then Wayne Clogg from West Fraser, and a bunch of other folks John Allen, because he was the CEO of Kofi at the time, and so I was on the Kofi board, and I got to really see this is
what it's all about.
This is what it's all about, and this is how you conduct yourself professionally, and this is the way that you balance the things that are at stake. So it was just a continuation of my education, for sure.
Yeah, it's funny to say that, because I'm working on this really big project that I'm working on, is the forestry from the world. Mm-hmm. So we have the Canadian forestry, or the BC forestry, and we also have the Ontario forestry. It's very different than what we do right here. And then we have the European forestry, which is kind of the origin of the Canadian forestry, because we learned basically everything, kind of moved that German system here, and kind of starting from cutting, site prep, planting, silviculture, thinning, and then rotation, and all those jazz. And I want to go there. I'm actually going there in June, just to have a whole plan for next year. I'm going back home to China, and then actually film what the Chinese forestry is. I have 2 places to visit. I want to go to Germany, and then film their stuff. Anyway, there's a big film project coming out next year.
Well, that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I think the chief forester is planning another trip to Finland next year as well. So we'll have to see if you can get yourself invited to that. I think it would be good to have a student representative on that trip.
Never gonna say no. But I also just found interesting. Everybody from BC is going to Finland to Sweden to learn forestry, but Ontario, because I went to college there, and then they have a very mature system, like selective cutting system they use in for their system. It's because their forestry started way back in the 1800s, between the wars between the British and the French, and then that's when they clear cut everything pretty much. And then there's a very famous photo in southern Ontario. There's a stump, and then because there was really coarse sediments down in the in southern Ontario, and then the whole organic A and B layer all gone, all eroded. So this stump kind of suspended in midair, and then down to the C layers. The only thing left was the C layer.
Wow.
And then they managed to use the red pine, kind of restore the ecosystem back, because traditionally it's the white pine dominated the system down there.
Right.
They're using the red pine, kind of restore it back to their to the white pine.
Hitting reset on the serial stages.
Yeah, exactly. And now they're doing crazy thing, using all kinds of systems, single tree selection, shelter wood, very different variations of those. And then they're a very mature system. And then I actually helped them to mark some trees in some of the county forest, and they have ecotourism and logging in the park. And, I just don't know why we don't go to Ontario to learn some of those things, try to use it up here in the north, and then we'll all just go to Europe, because that sounds like that's where we go every time.
Well, I mean, BC is unique, right? Like, and when you think about, if we think about forestry in BC, it really was a coastal phenomenon that moved its way into the interior over time.
Yeah.
We were talking about the birth of forestry in BC, and we were talking about H.R. McMillan as the chief forester back in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
We were really talking about coastal forestry.
Yeah.
And there isn't any other analogs to that. You can kind of go into the Pacific Northwest to a certain degree, but the Western red cedar forests and the Doug fir old growth, and there really aren't forests like that elsewhere in the world. And that's, again, where if we start talking about forestry in BC as being this monolithic thing, that there are just forests and there's just forestry in BC, you tend to gloss over how different the Kootenays are from a species mix and from an operability standpoint to, the Amanika Plateau, to the Chilcotin, to, the northwest of BC, the northeast of BC. Yeah. And let alone that any one of those areas is big enough to be a country on its own, let alone part of a province. But they're all very distinct economically, socially, ecologically. And so, yeah, I think it behooves us to go and try and learn from everybody that we can, to be humble and to be curious about what these forest practices are and what you're trying to achieve. And I think it's if you're thinking about how do we do something different with the interior forestry of BC, of northern central BC, that's where the Scandinavia makes a good analog. Then we're thinking about boreal forests or subboreal forests, and so I think that probably is what's attractive about that. But certainly, if we're looking at like what are different ways that we could manage tenures, how can we involve indigenous communities and indigenous nations more in forestry? What are different approaches to the same conversations that we're having all over the place? It'd be great, to spend more of that time, internally. Let's look at what they're doing in Alberta with forest management agreements, and Saskatchewan with forest management agreements. Yeah. So that it's not an either or between area-based tenures and volume-based tenures. We could actually, manage volume-based tenures on an area basis, and there are ways to to coordinate that and to do that. Certainly the forest landscape planning process we're undergoing right now in BC is a step in that direction to get more to area-based management, even without the tenure reform underneath it. But it's not the only way of doing it.
No, I just want to use this opportunity to if anybody know more or passionate about talking about the forest landscape plan, I'm actively looking for people to come in and share their views and knowledge and wisdom on this topic, because this word is being mentioned over and over and over again. So this is the future of forestry. This is the future of forestry. The forest landscape plans fix all the problems, but I just feel like we shouldn't be living in the fantasy that there are also going to be challenges. There's also going to be hard decisions they have to make, and then I think we should start talking about it now, and then we should share that with the students that's in school. It's learning forestry, and just want to make it more public available information for more people to know.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting actually to talk to some of the people who've been participating at the different tables too, and bring them together to have conversations about what their experiences are. Because I think it's Napoleon who gets credited with saying, like, plans are useless, but planning is essential.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I like that one even better. But the purpose of the really big opportunity with forest landscape planning is not the plans themselves. Plans are static things that don't react well to changing circumstances. But the process of planning, the process of bringing people with different views together and forcing them to, balance out those competing interests in trying to decide what to do on the land base, there's real value in that. And my view is, again, if we can move more towards regional or local forest management that's actually managing forests, and the recently elected government talked about doubling the community forest agreements in the province, or the area under community forest agreements in the province. So that suggests there's an opportunity to do that. But it's those community forest boards. It's the groups that are operating together to deliver the forest landscape plans. That's where we're going to get the biggest gains from, in having these competing ideas and competing points of view, and then finding compromises and making choices. And doing that hard work, but learning how to do that hard work in relation to forests is really important.
Yeah, I just hearing those just raise a question. Just come out right now. Trump, right down south, they're threatening us for tariffs.
Yeah. So
this 25% extra tariffs on pretty much everything, plus the current either tariffs or like duty and everything combined.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to impact our planning, and how is that going to impact, because they're our biggest export partners, and once we scale down to a community level, especially talks about, like, we don't want super mills, we want smaller mills, we want like more people, less machines, equip more people. But I'm just trying to figure out, because if you get more people working, have this idea of like more people means less efficient compared to machines, and that means more dollar per cubic meter or bore feet you produce compared to the super mills. Like how? So there's this very strong selection pressure from the states that need to compete, make your products compatible with the mills down south. And I just don't. Yeah, what's your thoughts on the tariffs and how that's going to drive our forest management? And it's a really tough question. I'm sorry, kind of put it on the spot.
There's a lot to unravel in that question, for sure. I mean, the threat of 25% tariffs is still just that. It's a threat, and it's been tied to border security, and it's been tied to fentanyl and all sorts of other things. So there are things for our government to dig into in preparation for the new president in the U.S., or the recycled president in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be catastrophic for the entire economy of Canada. There's no question about it, and it wouldn't. My understanding, I'm not an economist, but I sometimes play one on TV or in the classroom.
Yeah.
It's not good for the American people either. And it's interesting that you've got, a an election that the economy and affordability and inflation seem to be really motivating issues for the electorate. But I can't think of anything that would be more inflationary than, you know, adding tariffs and adding costs on everything that you're going to import across the border, and, you know, potentially initiating trade wars with your trading partners. So I find that interesting. Now, you know, leaving that aside for a second, we still have the softwood lumber duties, you know, from the Department of Commerce. That's a separate issue from any tariffs that the president may put in place. Those duties are still subject to annual reviews, and so you know, that's something that has been certainly an anchor on the forest sector economically,
right,
you know, since 2017, 2018, when the latest dispute started up again. Yeah, those are really tough things. Now, I personally am not sure about the notion of using the number of people working per cubic meter as the appropriate key performance indicator of how we're doing in the forest sector. But I do think, you know, yeah, let's look for opportunities to make sure that if we cut a tree down, we're using as much of that tree as is not needed for coarse woody debris or for other you know, ecosystem-based purposes. Let's try and put that to productive use. Yeah. And you know, to me, like, even from a greenhouse gas perspective, the trees cut down is considered to be, you know, essentially have gone up into the air at that point from a carbon accounting purposes. But if we can take that biomass and we can put it to work, it's a bit like putting a water wheel into a stream. That carbon flow is already happening out of that block that's been harvested. But if somehow we can, you know, use that, yes, we need to burn to reduce fire risk and to create plantable spots. And there's reasons why that takes place, but it sure seems to be a whole lot better if we could take that biomass and we could create heat and energy out of it, or we could create an exportable product out of it. Or, yeah, the gold standard would be, how do we create a long-lived engineer product out of material that is otherwise, you know, considered waste, that is going to be burned in some form or another. From a carbon perspective, from a value chain perspective, that's the holy grail. But, you know, we shouldn't overlook the potential to do some work with that material to support jobs, to support the economy, and you know, deliver some benefit from something that we've already invested in.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And this is actually a good segue, because I really want to talk about your organization, the Forest Enhancement side of BC. And from my understanding, you have two main goals, which are fiber utilization and then fire mitigation. And then so we talk about this. I just want to talk about the utilization thing first, because this is a buzzword that can throw them around, and then everybody go to Europe and then come back. Wow, how much they utilize their fiber? Everything's being used. Yeah. And myself, I did layouts, and then I did some pile burning before, and then kind of part-time, not supervised logging, but kind of watch logging. Yeah. I would say just kind of make sure they're doing the right thing, kind of thing. Yeah, for sure. We're burning a lot of things. We're leaving a lot of things in the block, and then burn them instead of haul them out. I guess the biggest question is, I've talked to some people, just another guy logging in the bush, that why don't you just haul them out? And then I laid out blocks for pulp mills, for standing trees. And then you have to, and then I just curious why we don't use those things piled already and then getting it burned instead of doing that, but we actually getting layout blocks, that pine, and then use them as a pulp or other energy sources. And I guess this big question is, it's not worth it right now. You lose money to haul all those piles out of the forest and then actually use them for whatever the product you want to produce. Like, how do we fix that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the central point there, I think, is that you can call it, low value timber if you want.
Yeah.
It may not attract a lot of stumpage, and it may not, you may not be able to generate high value products out of it, at least not currently. But that doesn't take away any of the costs associated with developing the block and building the roads and hiring the contractor and falling the trees and skidding the trees and processing the trees and loading the trees. Like we don't think of those as value added activities, but those are value added activities. Those are all investments that we're making in getting a tree, particularly if we're talking about an area that's being rehabbed, creating new plantable spots and removing, hazardous overstory or stuff that could be reburned or stuff that could, is going to fall over and potentially cause issues down the road. Those are real opportunities, but they're costly opportunities. It doesn't make it cheaper to do all those activities that you need to do. In fact, if you've got, if you're trying to skid and you've got higher breakage rates, or if you've got smaller piece sizes because the things have been burned down to nubs, those are all going to increase how much it costs you to actually deliver that material to roadside, which, doesn't square up with what the economic benefits necessarily are of bringing that tree to roadside. So, and that's where, that's one of the areas where the Forest Enhancement Society actually, gets to step in. So we do have, our objectives as an organization. We're a society under the Society Act in BC, a not-for-profit organization. We are funded by the BC government. Our objectives are, yes, they include those two objectives you mentioned, the fiber utilization or the rehabilitation piece and the wildfire risk reduction piece. But we also have objectives related to improving wildlife habitat, to managing greenhouse gas emissions in the forest, and trying to rehab damaged or undervalued stands where that makes sense to do so. So those are kind of the broader objectives of the society itself. Yeah. And the programs that we do, the fiber utilization one is primarily focused on getting, we don't change the value of the fiber, but we're looking at, okay, where are people actually bringing in this biomass that is otherwise being burned in piles, and where's the point where that stops distance-wise from the processing center, and what can we do to provide that incremental value that's going to allow the organization to go just that little bit farther and bring in that material that's otherwise going to be burned, make it part of the economic biomass supply for a region. So that's kind of how that program works.
So how does it work? If I were a licensee, let's say I want to utilize my piles, and let's say I'm in Mackenzie, I'm way up the lake. Yeah. It doesn't even make sense to even sometimes log in there with this market because everything pretty much past a certain point is just negative stumpage already. Yeah. So if I want to apply for this thing, is it like a grant application thing I've filled out, and then you basically
there's a program guide on our website. There's the applications on our website. I work with 4 amazing ops managers who are there to get to yes on different projects, but we work with community forests and First Nations and sometimes the pellet plants or the pulp mills or the River City is a great example of one that we work with in Kamloops. That's a partnership between Arrow Transport and Simk First Nation, and they do a lot of chipping for Kruger, and they've been running some really interesting programs that are able to put burnt trees into pulp chips, which just a couple of years ago was kind of like verboten, that there was no way that a pulp mill was going to accept pulp chips from burnt trees. But
we're talking about like burn, like charcoal burn, or like let it burn.
I mean, they try to break off as much of the burnt stuff as possible, and that will go into biomass. Right. But the risk before was always, if any of that char material gets into the paper product, it's going to customers are not going to be happy. But through different engineered processes and through different marketing and through different products, that they found ways to say, we can actually, in this time where our residual supply from pulp mills is shrinking because mills are closing down, we're able to get more pulp chips through salvage opportunities, which I talk about the triple word scores a lot. So, we're talking about rehabilitating stands. We're talking about putting people to work. We're talking about taking fiber that is otherwise going to, reburn or fall over and rot in the bush. Finding a way to put that to use, to put that water wheel in that stream of carbon that's out there. To me, those are amazing projects, and we're working on like these real opportunities for economic reconciliation with First Nations in the forest sector, because we're working with communities that are doing wildlife risk reduction. Or wildlife?
Wildfire.
Yeah.
Wildfire.
Make it sound like we're out there shooting bears or something. We're not doing that. We're not doing that.
Cutting this for clickbait.
Yeah.
Purposely.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Wildfire risk reduction and making communities safer. They're in these partnerships. There's crews that are out there doing the pruning and the spacing on wildfire risk reduction blocks that are Indigenous crews, and it's amazing to see. I've only been with the organization for 3 months, but
you started this whole thing, didn't you? From our understanding,
I was part of a team that definitely helped get the Forest Enhancement Society set up in its early days back in 2017 when I was with Government.
Yeah. I want to talk more about this. So, what was the purpose of starting this whole thing? What was was it like a political decision? Was it like a drive, or what drives?
This was actually something that came from inside the ministry. There was a lull in the wildfire seasons. There was money that had been appropriated to the BC Wildfire Service that didn't have a home, and at the same time, there's the softwood lumber dispute that's starting up. There's concern about the end of the mountain pine beetle, and there's still these dead mountain pine beetle stands that haven't been salvaged, that aren't coming back naturally in a way that we would want. So an opportunity to go and do more management. And so the challenge before us was, could we come up with a way of using this money that hadn't been spent on because of a quiet wildfire season in a way that would rehabilitate stands and use that fiber to keep people working or put people to work, and achieve benefits on the land base for we're talking about wildlife habitat and wildfire risk reduction in the future. So that was the conception, and then it took really an interdisciplinary team to figure out a way to do that. We recruited an initial board, and they got the initial grant of money, and they put the programs together to start actually driving these activities out on the land base. And 7 years later, I think 420 projects have been
amazing
completed. Yeah, it's wild. 30% of those, more than 30% of those, have a First Nation partner or service provider or contractor involved in them. So again, lots of triple word scores in there.
Yeah, so it sounds like this organization not just provide money. They also provide technical supports, and then kind of guide the industries or whoever wants to work with you with ways to help them to utilize their fiber, right? It's not just giving them money, go do whatever you want. And
no, for sure. There's the application process itself requires the applicants to be pretty specific about what they're trying to achieve. We've got experienced people in the ops managers roles who understand forestry, who understand the economics of it, who can make sure that the money's being used in an efficient and effective way. We're working with experts who are helping us see through the project management side of things, but it really comes down to we're fortunate that we have really passionate applicants who really want to achieve good forest management out on the land base, and we have this opportunity of having this funding from the provincial government to be able to do that. And then we're looking also for where are the opportunities to collaborate with other organizations, with other levels of government, to make their projects better, or maybe there's someone who's got a wildfire risk reduction project, but they're going to do fall and burn because that's what they have the money for in their programming. Well, if we can come in and help them with that last piece, and we can get that fiber utilized, whether it's a pellet plant or a pulp mill or an energy system, as opposed to just falling and burning it in the forest. Again, that's putting that that fiber to use in a way that that biomass to use in a way that supports what we're trying to achieve as an organization.
That's amazing. Yeah, I just feel like more people should know that, because right now, if you think about forestry, for anybody that have no idea what forestry is, and you mentioned the word forestry, and it's just thinking about like pure logging, clear cut, large scale machines running, knocking things down, nuking the whole land. But there are also a lot of efforts and people and talents that's in place right now to trying to improve the utilization, so we don't have to go out to the broader scales and do use everything we've cut down, or just use everything we can to not just wasting things in the block.
I think we're at an inflection point for the forest sector as a whole, where we're certainly our activities, I don't know if it's because everybody's got a camera / movie recorder, a video recorder in their pocket, and everywhere they go, people are more informed. They're more concerned. They have all the information that they could ever want at their fingertips. So, we are, going back to the earlier part of our conversation about communications. Communications are so important to everything that we do. That ability to actually have conversations, to talk in a way that people can understand what we're trying to achieve, to listen to people and be curious about what their concerns are, to take those concerns into account. Those are things that are being asked of us all the time. And, I see the future of forestry when I see myself as a forester and what the role of the forester is. Yes, historically, timber management has been a disproportionate amount of what we do as foresters. But I see a future where we're thinking about forest management to try and do what's ecologically appropriate on the land base, what's going to create a more resilient and stable land base over time, what's going to support all the different ecosystem services that get offered through forests. But we're going to do that in a way that is going to result in trees being harvested. It may be a lighter touch on a larger land base. It may be a heavier touch on a smaller land base. But there is going to be timber that's going to be generated from that, and the way that we're going to continue to grow the opportunity is through utilization, for sure, making sure that if we are going to go to that step of harvesting a tree, that we've got a good idea of how we're going to use all of the valuable biomass that's in the tree. That's part of it. But we've got to be thinking about how do we conduct even the activities that we're doing as foresters on the timber management side of things in a way that leaves communities safer, leaves forests more resilient, protects important features on the landscape. Those are all things that we can do within conventional timber management forestry as well, if we add that into our thinking, and help people understand that those are things that we're trying to achieve as well.
Yeah, totally. That's why we're doing this podcast, because I want more people to hear this. Yeah. And then want people to is because one of the biggest reasons I come back to school, to be honest, is because I see all the conflicts and we have lots of ways we can do forestry better. I don't think I've ever shared this story, but I actually got yelled at by a trapper one time. I was laying on blocks, just out there in the middle of nowhere in Mackenzie. Around this time, about 5-6 years ago, in late October, early November, and then me and my coworker, just two of us, get sent in to lay all this block, and we got the map. There's nothing important showing on the map. It's just like another map we get, and just go put ribbons on the trees, and then collect informations and put a site plan together. And so we're just doing our things, and then we found this cut trail. It's like a wide trail, wide enough you can put a quad through, and then we're just there's something that you don't see this often, right? Because we're really, really in the middle of nowhere, deep into the bush, and then we're just walking that thing, GPSing it, trying to report to the client. So and then at that point we stop we're not hanging ribbons anymore. We're just walking down the thing, and then you hear like something moving really fast towards us, and it was quite a bit of snow on the ground already. And they look back, and this guy was pretty tall, like 6'1", 6'2", and then like just walking towards me. We're talking about this guy, and the hands in, like he's got a hoodie, and then like in a pocket, and then like he's walking towards us, like, what the F you're doing here? You know, who the F you think you are? Like, get the F out of here, blah blah blah. And then he was talking to me like face to face, and then apparently we're in his trap line. It was a trap line that we didn't know, and he claimed that the whole forest is his private property. He's got a land pattern number that pretty much everybody in Mackenzie's trespassing. Whether he agree or not, but he was really, really angry with us being there. And then he's like, if you hang ribbons in the private property, that's like felony. I can citizen arrest you and blah, blah, blah. I thought he was going to pull like a pistol or start shooting us. He was, what's more scary than seeing a bear running at you in the bush? Seeing the human beings running towards you. And he was mad. And I just show him the map that we got, and like this is something we didn't know there's a trap line here. Obviously, apparently the cabin's pretty close to where we were, and then that block was previously, I figured this out later, but it was previously being developed by a licensee, and then it never happened because of him. And then another licensee came in trying to develop that thing, never happened because of him. And then we were the third licensees that went in there and tried to develop this. And then I didn't know anything until I ran into him. So that's first.
That's a hard position for a young forester to be put in for sure.
And that was early. That was like 2019. That was when I was first got into forestry. I was just enjoying my life, just laying on blocks, being out there in the wilderness with my friends and learning the plants, just being out there, walking around, getting paid. It was a really good paying job. And that was my first time ever that learned how people have really strong opinion of what we do as a foresters. And that probably sparked kind of, one of the reasons I came back to school is how do we deal with stuff like that, is the different values, they're conflicts, and then they don't work together really well. It required check, balance, and compromising. It required trade-off.
That's right. Well, sometimes people get passionate about landscapes. They get passionate about forests. They get passionate about trees. They get passionate about what they view as their own personal history, for sure. Yeah. That's the story of this province in a nutshell. Is people being in dispute over who gets to make the decisions on the land base, and to whose benefit do those decisions get to be made. And it's if going back to that kind of the landscape planning piece, like if we can figure out ways to have better conversations and in less heated ways to kind of
emotions always high.
Emotions are always high. Yeah.
Have you ever run into stuff like that, like out there in the bush or maybe at work, and somebody really strongly disagree with what you do, or as what foresters do in general, like a hostile environment?
Yes.
Is there Shuribo or no?
Well, I don't know if the details are as important as what I was surprised about is how, particularly in the early days, like it being in those conflicts pushed me into a more defensive stance and made me more maybe more adamant about what I was doing and less sensitive to what other people might be thinking. And that's something that I've had opportunities to kind of reflect on, and how do you that's one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that we had a communications class in going back to our class this semester. But having that, those aren't skills that we're given in forestry school. No. How to de-escalate conflict. I'm just a guy with a map who has zero information about what you're talking about, but I can tell that you're really upset by this. Let's figure out who we can get you to talk to so that we can have a good conversation about that. Maybe that approach is going to work, maybe it isn't, but I can only imagine, because I was in a similar situation. You're just thinking, oh crap, I just want to get out of here.
Yeah.
I'm just a guy doing a job, and like, why is this person yelling at me? And they must be a big jerk. And like, that's human nature.
Yeah. And
somehow we got to try and overcome that and say, okay, well, there are big feelings here that are involved, and maybe all the big feelings are on one side of it, but there are these trade-offs that are being made. We are asking people to make sacrifices, whether they want to or not, and that can be really hard.
That actually, I want to throw this question. This is a question that's not from me. It's from Boris. Pretty sure that's his name. He's a member of the Forestry Club. And then I kind of shared that we are doing this podcast with you, and then kind of ask anybody have any questions.
Oh.
And he has these questions about, I don't know him in person, but I think he's just started at UNBC, like from scratch.
Right on.
Might be a transfer student. We've got lots of, I would say most of students in forestry are transfer students.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he's asking, so...
Maybe he's another anthropologist, philosopher.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably go to law school in the future. And then he's just wondering if I can pick a brain about the BC Ministry of Forest jobs and FPBC.
Mm-hmm.
So he specifically wants to know that, he's from an outsider. He's not clear what's going on in those two groups. And most of the information he got is from the second and third hand from coworkers. And he heard comments of how FPBC doesn't fight for the forestry workers industry, even though they are paid by the forest professionals. And then he also wondered, he heard, right? Working for the ministry is like a semi-retirement. And I get where these comments are coming from, and he just want to know how forestry professional or student can work towards creating a more sustainable forestry in the future, and in ways such as changing legislation practices. I think these are really legit questions, and then I just want to throw them at you. I don't know if that's too much to
It's a bit rapid fire, but we'll see if it works.
Yeah, so basically 3-part question.
Yeah. So I want to dismiss the one of them off the bat. When I worked in the public service, I had never worked with more dedicated or harder working people who had less control over their day-to-day lives, and maybe didn't even have the best compensation as I did in working in the public service. There are so many dedicated professionals there who are passionate about doing the right thing. Not saying there aren't bad apples there. There are bad apples everywhere, but that shouldn't spoil the bunch. Again, there are people who were mentors to me, who have become lifelong friends, who are people that I look up to as far as the way that they conduct themselves and what they're able to achieve professionally in the public service. And I love being in the public service. I love that I'm in a not-for-profit role now. It's kind of adjacent to the public service.
Mm-hmm.
You take an oath to serve the people of British Columbia when you join the public service, and I don't know how many people know that.
I didn't know.
So everybody who becomes a member of the public service takes an oath. There's an expectation that you're going to put the good of the people of the province above, your own personal good. You're going to carry out to the best of your ability the tasks that have been set for you, and through the elected officials that represent the people of the province. So there's something to that. Maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but it certainly spoke to me. Taking that oath, and that's one of 3 oaths I've taken in my life, because of course I've taken an oath as a professional forester, and I've taken an oath when I joined the Bar Society of BC as well as a lawyer, and that goes to the second question. So I'll try and segue into that. The Professional Governance Act replaced the Foresters Act, which used to be what set up the Association of BC Forest Professionals, which is what it was before it was the Forest Professionals of BC. The Professional Governance Act sets a really different role for FPBC than the historic role that was played by the Association of BC Forest Professionals. And you should really try and get Christine Gelowitz on your podcast.
I have her card,
good.
The business card. I tried.
All right. Well, Christine, if you're listening to this podcast, you should come on and talk to Hinda.
Please.
Yeah. But, that change was made to really put the focus of the association on the management of the professionals, to increase public trust that, the people who are being trained as forest professionals, the people who are joining that profession, were accountable to the public, that had the public interests first, and as a priority. And one of the things that changed about it, it no longer calls itself an association because it doesn't have that same role of acting as an advocate. It's not a union. It's not an association. It's a registrant, and it's there to make sure that the people who call themselves professional foresters are well trained, continue their professional development throughout their career, hold themselves to accountable to a code of conduct and a high standard of behavior and practice. Only practice within areas that they're competent to practice in. That's the role of the forest professionals of BC. And if you go and go on the website and go look at the bylaws and go look at the the code of ethics that's in there, the responsibility for advocating on behalf of the forests, the practice of forestry, that's the job of individual members. We all have an obligation to actually go out to correct misinformation where it exists, to check ourselves and check our co-members if we're acting in a way that's inconsistent with the values of the FEBC, or not acting in that public interest. That's what being a professional is saying that I'm going to hold myself to a standard that's been set, and my expectation is other people are going to hold me to that standard, and I'm going to hold other people that call themselves professionals to that standard. That's what allows you to go out and earn the trust of the people of British Columbia to manage forests on their behalf.
Right.
And so it's if there's more work that needs to be done to communicate, that falls on us as foresters. If there's more work that needs to be done to clarify what's actually happening out there, that's work that falls on us as foresters to do.
Yeah. Another time, I want to say this once again, I just appreciate that you come here and then teach us these stuff, right? Because you're doing your parts of educating the next batch of foresters, and I think it's important.
I do it for the adoration, really. It's
No, Jason's amazing. Yeah, and again, I just appreciate that I have you as my instructor for a policy class.
Oh, my pleasure.
And then what I'm trying to do, and then I also have this is not a shameless plug. It's just kind of explain. I have a YouTube channel basically making a whole bunch of videos about the forestry. I have one. The biggest view is like what we do as a forestry technicians in British Columbia. Because believe it or not, it's so hard to explain even to our family member that what we do. We do layout. Okay, what is a layout? Oh, we plan a harvest cut block. What is a cut block? And then it's really hard for them to explain. This is such a niche career that it's so hard to explain. So and then if you search like layout or cruising, there's nothing online that's systematically explaining what you do. So I'm working on this project right now. It's kind of basically talking about different jobs in the forestry sector, from the planting foresters to the permitting foresters, and to the silviculture foresters, and then up to the public sectors, and then and then the district manager, the deputy foresters, and what those kind of introductive video, so people can, probably like 2 minutes long, people can search the really simple video. People just understand what it is all about. It's not a propaganda for the whole industry. It's simply laying out facts that this is what they do. This is what it takes from standing trees, from the planning, from the permitting, from the field work to harvesting, and then all the legislation and regulation have to follow, and then to silviculture, and then obviously some of the challenging that we're facing. And then that's another project I'm working on right now. So I just want to use this opportunity to kind of advocate professionals out there that, I think we need those videos out there. So, but I have very limited knowledge in those areas. Myself, I work in the field for 6 years, and then so when it comes to how to get a block laid out and cruised and then get a site plan prepared and hand it off to the permitting team, I can cover that part, no problem. But when it comes to the planning, what it takes to engage with the First Nation groups, what happened when they disagree with some of the decisions, and then it comes down to the permitting, how to get a permit, different permit, road permits, engineering cost of estimations, and down to the planting side. I pumped 60 trees in one of the block I laid out and cruised and harvested. It was my favorite day that day because it's the full cycle kind of closed.
Yeah.
But I just advocate, like, please, if you listen to you're experts in those areas, I would love to have you to come to our podcast. Just talk about what you do. Again, this is not a propaganda. We don't have to, to kind of make forestry sounds fancy. I just wanted to learn from your perspective what you do as your profession. So,
well, and I think that's really, it's really interesting to get to hear those perspectives too, because you again, if you talk about like jobs per cubic meter, or if you talk about value added, there are some places where it makes more sense to leave trees standing. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but there are places where it does make sense to build houses out of lumber instead of out of concrete and steel. And there are places where the land can handle and forest can handle being harvested and replanted and have that done in a scientific and sensitive and ecologically competent way. And in those cases, like, value added starts from the inventory to the to laying out the block, to doing the engineering, to all of those things are adding value to that stand of trees that we're hoping that is going to get captured in the market at the end of the day for products. But all those things have to be done before you can make products out of it. And all those people contribute to the value that gets generated. And if those products are exported, those are new dollars coming from outside British Columbia into British Columbia that really drive our standard of living. So it is important. And those people are largely invisible, right? Or misunderstood, and I think understanding the degree of professionalism, understanding that the forest technologists are professionals as well. It's not just RPFs, it's RFTs, it's everybody holding themselves to those standards, understanding that they've got an obligation to the public who are working in these places. And I know that we've missed question number 3 in the 3-part question, but I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, that was I love how you still remember. So that was how forestry professions and students can work towards creating a more sustainable industry in ways such as changing legislation and practices. Well,
I feel like this should be on the final exam. It should have been a final exam question for the class, right?
Please don't make a final exam. The student taking next year is going to hate me.
Yeah. No, but yeah. So as a professional, that's part of your obligation to advocate for stewardship all the time in whatever the forms is. We talked about that.
It's in the code of conduct, actually. Yeah.
Having conversations with people to help them understand forestry, to clear up misconceptions, that helps. You can run for office, whether that's going to be municipal or provincial or federal. That's if you really want to change legislation and you really want to change the direction of things, that's probably the most impactful route that you can go. You can work for the public service. You can join a board of a local community forest. You can volunteer to go talk to K-12 classes, or there's so many ways that you can engage with people to help them understand what's at stake, to help them understand what the trade-offs are, to help them understand where the compromises are, and to help you yourself understand that too. All these things you do, you may think you're changing other people, but you're changing yourself. You're learning different perspectives. You're being exposed to new ideas all the time. That's how you're going to get things done, by having conversations with people, by seeking to understand them. Don't rush in just thinking, okay, I know the way to fix this. There are no silver bullets in anything that we do from a policy or management perspective. I sometimes think like forestry is a bit like a tapestry, and if you pull on one thread, you're not going to take the thread out. You're just going to completely distort the picture.
Mm-hmm.
All the threads are connected to all the other threads, and so really understanding ahead of time what kind of impacts you're going to have, I think is essential to making a positive difference in the long run.
That raised another question that I have, because I'm graduating.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to join the forestry sector somehow, one way or another. So private, either working as a consultant or as a licensee or as a other area, or you can join the Ministry of Forest or BCTS. And I just,
or you can be like me and do it all, just not at once, but yeah.
So which type of person fits what kind of role? Like, because you've been to both side of this business, and then can you just like briefly talk about what kind of people might fit the ministry better, or like what is like working in the ministry, or
gosh, I think it takes all types in all areas. We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's really important. And the reason that it's really important is because you get different perspectives. And what we really need to make sure is that we don't just have echo chambers in any part of the sector where you think you have the answer, and you think you have the answer because everybody has the same ideas that you do, so you all must be right. And
false consensus bias,
and that's the risk that we run. So the advice that I always give people, if they ask about, like, how did you end up on this career path that you ended up on? I said yes to things more than I said no to things. I always try to do, interesting work with good people. If the work's not interesting, but the people are good, that makes it easy to stay a little bit longer. If the work's interesting and the people aren't good, like, maybe you can stay. But if you don't have those two things for long, it's not usually a good place. It's going to wear you down. It's going to burn you out. I think it's really important that you're just clear as an individual about what are your values, like where are the lines that you don't cross, and what's important to you. What are you trying to achieve through your career? Not that you need to have it all mapped out, but if you're going to say, well, my priority, my key value, that my North Star is family, right? Then, well, you're not going to be happy in a camp job.
No.
You're not necessarily going to be happy. But and I don't say that to denigrate any of the people who have to make really hard economic choices about what they're doing that aren't necessarily consistent with their values. But that's going to have a toll on people over time.
Yeah.
But if you are clear that I really do, want to be in the room where it happens, like, maybe you do want to move up in the public service because you really do want to influence the policies, and or maybe it's about building consensus that's really important to you, or maybe it is about the economic side of things, and you really do want remuneration. Like that's a legitimate value. I'm not saying that's not a legitimate value, but be clear about what is really important, and don't fall for other people's values or just take them verbatim as what your values should be because other people hold them. Spend time doing work thinking about what it is that you're trying to achieve in your career. I think is the most important thing that you can do early on.
That's a great piece of advice, I think. So I want to join like the Ministry of Forest, I want to join the public service sectors, and what would be the best route to start working on that? Like, because they're not hiring all the time, and then what kind of positions or what kind of jobs or what kind of experience I should put on my resume. So when they see my resume, they say, "Ooh, we need to hire this person," either she or her or him. What kind of stuff I need to put on my resume, they will most likely to be hired.
Oh gosh, well, anyone who's done a job interview in the public service knows that they're challenging job interviews. So you need to understand where those come from. That they are experiential. Tell us about a time when you did this. Tell us about a time when you did that. Tell us about a time when you had demonstrated this value skills, or skill that we're concerned about in the job. I think I think it's, maybe there's not job openings all the time, but there are a lot of job openings still. The FPBC website always has its long list of job openings that are available. If you're not tied to a particular place, so if you're still kind of looking for where you want to put your roots down, I think there's lots of opportunities with almost any part of the forest sector to contribute. I have friends who work internationally in forestry.
Wow.
A good friend of mine has his own consulting company, and he's down in Chile working on forestry management projects. And it's amazing how far a career in forestry can take you. It's not necessarily going to be a straightforward path. It is for some people, but potentially there's a lot of forks along the way. So I don't have a mechanical kind of process answer for your question. I think try and find things that interest you, that you feel like you might develop a passion for.
Yeah.
Find things that you want to learn that maybe you don't want to go to school for, but you can find a job that's going to teach you the things that you want to know if you put in the hard work and show the dedication.
Because for me, when I was really clear the reason I came back to school, like why I want to come back to school. I want to learn, higher level stuff, and then also pick biology and conservation as a minor. I also want to kind of see how to find a balance between like the operational forestry and the wildlife conservation, and then that's the biggest reason. And then so I have really clear path, like vision of what I want to achieve at school. But when you get to the end of this program, and then when you're about to graduate, and when you're about to get into workforce, I found myself really confusing because I'm not sure what I want to do. I definitely wanted to make some positive changes, that just make myself sound fancy, but I just want to do something positive for these communities, and then also want to do some educational stuff. I have a YouTube channel, I'm doing this podcast, and kind of just want to, again, just make sure people understand what we do as a forester in BC. And if I'm confused, I figure there are a lot of students also confused what I want to do in the future, because they're probably coming here before they come here, they have some work in the forestry, the layout crews, and go other, silviculture, planting, whatever. And then they also confuse what they want to do in the future.
Yep.
So I feel like that's the reason I asked the questions, and I think you gave an amazing answer.
Oh, thanks. Well, and I think what I find interesting is that, you talk about what you want to do, but those are things that you're already doing. So you're already, maybe if the path isn't laid out before you, you just cut your own path, like like the mad trapper.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, last two questions.
All right.
And then these are I think I need to start like a rapid question fire section at the end of every episode. And basically, as a forester, is there anything you regret you're doing in the past that you give you the chance to do it again, you can do it like differently? What was the first thing that jumped out in your mind? That sounds like a hard, unfair question.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that jumps to my mind, I'm like, do I have to change the names to protect the innocent? Nothing that bad. I think that there's not a lot that I regret. Are there things that I could have done better? Absolutely. But I couldn't have done them better at the time because I didn't know better.
Yeah.
But all you can really hope for is that you're going to learn from all the stupid things that you do along the way, and all the mistakes that you make, and the time you drive into the middle of the puddle and then get high centered and you spend the next 3 hours digging yourself out. Yeah. That teaches you a lot about driving in the bush when you do that. That's an education that you're not going to get at any price any other way. I think that's the scary part of being a professional, if there is a scary one, is that you are going to have to make hard calls, and you're going to have to
own up to it
and hold yourself accountable and say, yeah, I did this, and this is the reason why I did it. And, the outcome is not what I was intending, or there's new information that came available that wasn't available at the time. And, yes, this happened, but it was still better in my professional view than the alternatives that were available to me in making the decision.
That's awesome.
That's what the public expects of us.
That's awesome. Okay, last question. So Harry Potter shows up, and then he's like, okay, I can wave my magic wand and then make anything happen as long as you make the you say so. And then what would that magic wand to fix in BC Forestry right now? Only one thing, the top thing right now that can make BC Forestry that much better, and then you can define better in any terms you want, any way you want.
I would love us to have, maybe this is wearing my Fest BC hat a little bit. I would love us to have a more diversified, distributed energy system that relied more on biomass. Because I think if you've got a system that relies on biomass, then it unlocks the potential to do so much additional forest management activities when you're thinking of things like, pre-commercial thinning and then commercial thinning, increased utilization. I think of the communities that are still on diesel in some parts of the province. So if we could have, if every community that had like a library and a city hall and a pool could have a central heating system that ran on biomass, I think that would drastically transform BC forestry and really unlock the potential to do more forest management for resilience, for wildfire risk reduction, for improving wildlife habitat. All the things that we're trying to do creates an outlet for an economic outlet for some of that fiber, supports all those jobs. That would be amazing if we could do that.
Perfect. That's awesome. Is there anything else you want to add for today? Anything you want to say to students or to forest professionals, anybody that's out there? Anything you want to add to something that's, you're eager to say, you're fired up, I want to get this off my chest, anything?
I'd like to say, just thank you to all the forest professionals who are out there working, putting in an effort, making the hard choices, feeling underappreciated, feeling nervous about their futures. You are doing things that are important. You're doing things that matter. If you're learning about forests, if you're engaging in conversations about forests and you're not a professional forester, you're still part of the solution that we're all working towards. So, I hope that anyone listening to this, whether they agree with me or not, feels comfortable to talk about these issues more and feels appreciated and valued.
That's awesome. And then today, I want to emphasize, this is opinions, right? This is our opinions, and you're absolutely okay to disagree with everybody, but we should honor the right. Can still have this conversation. You can calm down and not just yelling at each other, and then it's actually having a peaceful exchange of information. And I think that's something we're lacking a little bit right now in the society we're living in right now, and definitely something we want to work for to make sure that different group of people that communicate on the same wavelength and then communicate in a very efficient manner. Yeah,
avoid that confirmation bias. Try and have conversations with the people who disagree with you and figure out how to have them in productive ways, and try and get people, talk to people who disagree with you in different ways, because, the more perspectives you get, the more completely you're going to see the problem and the potential solution set that's out there.
That's the beauty of forestry. It's such a complex thing that just affects a lot of people that you need to kind of learn from different perspectives.
Yeah. If you have two foresters around a soil pit, you'll get three soil types at least. So there's lots of opinions out there.
Yeah, and it's important for us to learn. There's no way around this.
Yeah.
All right, so this wrap up this app. I forgot. I lost my count which episode. So one episode of the podcast. We thank you for tuning in and spending time listening to us chit-chat about forestry, nature, and life at UNBC. So UNBC Forestry Club Podcast is a student-led podcast sponsored by absolutely nobody, but a bunch of students who are passionate about forestry, the outdoors, the adventures. New episodes hopefully drop every week. So stay tuned for more insightful conversations and inspiring stories. Until next time, let's continue to grow together, rooted in our love for the forest. Have a great week, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, Jason, for coming.
Thank you.